And here we go.
When you're walking and talking and freaking and yelling and bossing and speaking and looking at a point, no one tells what to do with your high top shoes and your wavy toes with the black short shorts. Don't let 'em get away. Don't think they can play and nail 'em to the wall 'cause you really need to say. Gotta go straight, they back out, baby, my right hand, turbo jacket. He said, when you're walking and talking, but he's faster than me. Shout my walkie-talkie man.
Hello and welcome back to Monday Mayhem on a Tuesday. I'm coming back a little bit late because I went and got myself married.
Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today.
So we're just going to quickly go through the hearts and farts. I usually have I know like what I got right and what I got wrong segments. And of course, the infamous who scored more than Kyle Pitts. But Kyle Pitts scored a touchdown. And frankly, I just didn't really watch the games. I was in the car all the way from Sault Ste. Marie to Quebec on Sunday. So yeah, I just basically went through the results, got the studs and duds, so we can run through those. But man, so many injuries and so much shit to get to. I wanted to really focus this episode on, I've got a couple 1-5 or 1-5, 1-4. No, yeah, 1-5, 1-5, and 2-4 teams. Struggling. I don't have any 0-6. But there's definitely some teams that need a lot of work if they're going to make the playoffs. And so this episode is going to primarily focus on that. But like I said, hey, let's just run through some studs and duds, starting with the Hearts. So for quarterback, Tua, Goff, Hurts, Sam Howell has been rebounding nicely, had a nice game. Desmond Ridder, in spite of his real life struggles for fantasy, hasn't been that bad. Lamar and Mahomes, Stroud, Allen, and Burrow. It was really just kind of like a low scoring thing. And shout out to fantasy footballers and shout out to whoever they referenced on their show. But there was something shared on Twitter or X or whatever the fuck you want to call the damn thing, that something like 60% of the NFL games this year have hit the under, which is like a record since, the early aughts, early 2000s there. Raheem the Dream Mostert, though, he keeps just crushing it. Kyron Williams had a monster game, but he got hurt. CMC had a good game. He got hurt. Just so many guys are injured. It's crazy. ETN, King Henry continue to ball out. Breece Hall through volume, and they let him in for that touchdown. So I would still be looking to sell Breece Hall just because of the Jets situation. Ken Walker, Ramondre sighting with the touchdown. Alvin Kamara has been getting it done with the volume since he returned. And really, Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller aren't really pushing him for any kind of competition. Zach Moss keeps getting it done, even though JT is back. DeAndre Swift, Chuba, Pacheco, Hunt. He's going to be a popular waiver ad. Barkley, CMC, like I mentioned, and Brian Robinson. Tyreek. The one thing I did see is Tyreek grabbing the phone from that guy and doing the backflip in full Union cleats with a phone in one hand and a football in the other. Like, this dude is insane. Like, my God, what an athlete. So Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra, Cooper Kupp, Adam fucking Thielen. Literally was singing to my wife in the car, I'm hooked on a Thielen. Hi, I'm believing that you're in love with me. He's got 10 receptions. He's got 100 yards. He's even got a touchdown from the rookie Bryce Young. I can't fucking sing, but man, Adam Thielen is just crushing it this year. Drake London had a nice volume game. AJB, Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Rashid Shaheed, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Waddle, Zay Jones, Jacoby Myers keeps getting it done. Garrett Wilson, another trade candidate. I'll talk about him a little bit later, actually. Tyler Boyd and Chris Olave. For tight end, hey, Travis Kelce. Finally, Kyle Pitts finds the end zone. Dalton Schultz. Jonnu Smith, though, keeps popping up. He's splitting volume with Kyle Pitts, which is kind of crazy. Michael Mayer finally starting to, become more part of the offense. There was a Taysom Hill sighting. Evan Ingram keeps getting it done with kind of low-end volume. TJ Hawkinson and Mark Andrews. And then for the defense, it was Vikings, Chiefs, Jags, Bengals, and then Rams, Jets kind of tied for fifth. But shout out to the fucking Jets for that defense won that game. That's what happened. And then just quickly, like I said, we'll just get into the farts.
Shots, explosives.
Gino, Russ, Brock Purdy-licious finally had a bad game. Kirk Cousins, Baker, and Justin Fields got hurt. That one fucking killed me in a lot of leagues. Joe Mixon, Deonta Foreman didn't really come through, even though he had that whole backfield pretty much to himself. James Cook, man, that one is like, I just don't understand what the fuck the Bills are doing there, running out, old-ass Latavius Murray and just insisting on like this weird two-way. It's like a two-way split, but then they're also mixing in Damian Harris whenever he's healthy, so it just becomes like this muddled, gross backfield. And you want to talk about muddled, gross backfield, look at fucking Denver running backs. Like, I love Javonte Williams in the story, but he's not fantasy relevant right now. And Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin, they might have a couple spike games random here and there, but nothing that you can really rely on for fantasy. D-Mop, that was another one, fucking David Montgomery. I had one, my Megala Bowl team, again, shout out to Fantasy Footballers, is just decimated. Put up a grand total of 60 points this week because Justin Fields and David Montgomery, both of my lineup got hurt. Already had James Conner on IR. Just decimated. And I'm sure lots of people are feeling that way. And then Dameon Pierce just continues to struggle. I mean, Devin Singletary outplayed him, so that's not a good sign. DJ Moore, Devonta Smith, Mike Evans, JSN. JSN has been completely irrelevant for redraft. I love his talent, but this was always my worry about the situation and why I don't have any shares of him. KJ Osborne, Josh Reynolds was relegated to irrelevancy by Jameson Williams. Puka Nacua finally had a bad game. I don't think that means that he's just like irrelevant now. Again, he kind of fills more of that Robert Woods role now that Cooper Kupp is back. This will happen, but he's still going to have good games. Calvin Ridley, his struggles have really continued. He's really only had like a couple of good games. And even then, the second one was just kind of the touchdown. So it does feel like, again, kind of what my worry was. He's getting back into football shape, and it kind of maybe takes a full season for him to get really back to the wide receiver one that we kind of saw for, one half of his opening of the season. And when you kind of think about it, it's like, yeah, well, of course, like it's the very first game of the season. You're coming out, you're full of adrenaline, and he popped off for a half, but then he didn't really do anything in the second half, and he really hasn't done a whole lot the rest of the season. Devontae Adams, that one was weird. He got like just hammered, but I think he stayed in the game, showing his toughness again. But in the quarterback situation between Jimmy G and Aiden O'Connell kind of sucks. So that's just something to keep an eye on. T. Higgins, Gabe Davis. Oh, man, Gabe Davis really struggled. Had fumbles and everything. That one hurt me too. Nuke and Debo. Debo, again, getting hurt, just joining the litany of IR superstars. Sam Laporta finally had kind of a mid-game. David Njoku's been pretty irrelevant this year in terms of fantasy. Though he did have that really cool moment where he came out like a Batman villain with his mask on. Tyler Higbee, Hunter Henry, George Kittle. The George Kittle disappearing acts have been not just have they been really frustrating, and you can see them coming, but the fact that they just keep getting injured at other positions, like Debo's hurt, CMC's hurt, and you would think like, okay, well, maybe Kittle sees more targets, especially with Purdy-licious in there, and it just kind of hasn't really happened. I mean, we had the one big game, the one kind of mid game, and a bunch of ghost acts. So it's been a really weird season for George Kittle. And I know that's kind of his modus operandi, his MO, as they say. But I guess I just wasn't really expecting the lack of consistency when some of those other options went out, because traditionally when they haven't had like a Debo and a CMC, they have relied more on Kittle in those games. And then Logan Thomas, he kind of just disappeared. But, I mean, tight ends are so crazy. Like, you can hold on to them. And for defense, kind of a lot of big names for defense. The Patriots, the Saints, the 49ers, the Eagles, and the Bills all kind of just had mid-games, which was really, it was a weird week in general. It felt like a lot of upsets. There's no more undefeated teams. And just, man, the injuries, I swear to God, like, and everyone I know, all fantasy players are lamenting just the amount of injuries. It's like that scene in Space Jam. Like, this is everybody's teams right now. So there is some positive news that we can take from this. There is a shit ton of waivers that need to kind of be parsed through. And then I also want to get into trades. I've kind of, touched on trades before, but this, I really went through kind of some of the top scoring players. And so, really looking at a lot of the people that are actually performing and kind of parsing out their schedules and, trying to project a little bit who you might want to trade away and trade for. Again, heavily dependent on your schedule, yourself, and like your own record in your fantasy football league, right? So, if you're staring down the barrel like I am in a couple leagues where you're 2-4, this is like make or break essentially this week, and you're gonna have to make some moves. So whether it's the waivers that I'm about to tell you or the trades, definitely do not let yourself go out sleeping. Never give up. Never surrender. All right, let's get into some of these waiver guys.
Who in the blue hell are you?
So number one for me, we'll start with quarterbacks. I'm looking at Sam Howell. I like that he was able to rebound from that really terrible game. The fact that they haven't already turned to Jacoby Brissett tells me that he's got a little bit more rope than maybe I believed originally. And just given that there's some bye weeks coming up, you could probably do worse for a streaming option. He is going to be facing at the Giants. Their defense has been pretty disappointing, so I do feel like he can take advantage of that matchup. Derek Carr is going to have a lot of decent matchups coming up, and even though he's a really mid option, his floor is a pretty safe one. So if you're just kind of looking to make sure that you're not getting janked by your quarterback anymore, I think Derek Carr feels like kind of a safe option. And then really, on the back burner, Gardner Minshew, now that it's pretty much confirmed that Anthony Richardson is likely to miss the rest of the season, unfortunately, Gardner Minshew should be owned in deeper leagues and in super flex leagues. And these are guys that should be available off of waivers, whether you're in 10 to 12 man redraft, Probably not in Superflex for Howell and Carr, but you might be able to get Minshew. But even he might not generally be available again, depending on how deep that league is. For running backs, this is where the juice is this week. This is where everyone is sweating. You've got the 49ers running backs are going to be very popular. Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell. Elijah Mitchell, in a lot of the leagues I'm in anyways, tends to be less owned. He kind of has been a stash. And it seems like he's likely kind of and a little bit more the favorite of Shanahan to actually be the starter. But Jordan Mason, now in his second season, he's going to get work. I'm still prioritizing Mitchell, but I would be willing to put a small bid in on Mason. But the problem is it's probably not going to go through. I'm focusing my energies more on the combination of Zach Evans and Craig Reynolds. So, with David Montgomery and Kyren Williams with the ankle, and whether that ankle ends up being short term. I mean, ankles very rarely end up being less than 3 weeks. So I'm looking at it in my head as very potentially having Zach Evans for 3 weeks. And I'm kind of thinking the same thing for Craig Reynolds, where I'm looking at maybe a 3 to 4 week window until David Montgomery is able to return. And so that's a little bit longer. And, I'm looking at a little bit more of floor play maybe from those guys as opposed to the volatility of Mason, who, yes, may have a higher ceiling, but could also have a lower floor. And at this point, when you're just really like trying to scrape out wins, probably, I know for me anyways, a lot of times the issue has been consistency. So again, this is team dependent as well. If you're having a lot of spike weeks, for example, and just, your other weeks, you're just flailing, or you're just looking to fill some spots and you've got guys that are going for spike weeks, like you're very wide receiver rich and you're just kind of trying to pound whatever running back into the mold that you can. I do have some leagues like that, for example, like one of my dynasty leagues where I've been trading for wide receivers for years now. Even though I lost Justin Jefferson, I still have Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So it's a crazy combination. But at this point, I have like no running backs. So a guy like, guys like Jordan Mason, Craig Reynolds, Zach Evans, those are guys I'm just looking to pound into my lineup. The most popular one, it feels like, though, and on a longer term for the rest of the season because of the Nick Chubb injury, is going to be Kareem Hunt. He was definitely kind of ignored and slept on with his return to Cleveland. And I think also there's a little bit of sunk cost fallacy where people don't want to be wrong about Jerome Ford and the amount of fab that went on Jerome Ford. And it's definitely not going to be like Kareem Hunt's backfield to himself. They're definitely going to split work. But Cleveland is very much a run-focused team. And so Kareem Hunt's definitely going to have value. In fact, out of all of these names, to me, he's the one I would prioritize the most in the, shallower leagues where he is available on waivers. Salvin Ahmed has kind of been it's funny because in the preseason, and I was very much on the Devon Achane hype train. He's one of my most drafted players before the preseason. And even, after preseason week 1, I was kind of just ignoring, it's the first week of the preseason, who cares? By preseason week 3, when it was Salvin Ahmed looking good out there instead of Achane, I did start to back off of it a little bit in some redraft leagues where I wasn't drafting Achane quite as much. I still was taking some late shots on him, but I definitely had backed off of it a little bit, and it was because of the fact that it was, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert, who's been so good, and Salvin Ahmed, and at the time even Myles Gaskin was still there. So you really didn't know for sure how the running backs were going to shake out, but I did know Achane ultimately is Tyreek Hill in the running back position. So I was still in on him, but I was kind of hedging my bets a little bit because of Salvin Ahmed. So if Achane is not available and Ahmed is filling that role as kind of like a very light version, then he's definitely kind of worth pot shots. Like he saved me in a deep guillotine league where I lost I'm without Nick Chubb. And then, of course, dumped all my fab on Justin Jefferson when he went from somebody else who got axed from the league. And then he immediately went on IR. And I lost Anthony Richardson also. So I'm hanging on by a thread in that guillotine league, but I'm still there. Salvin Ahmed, and then if for some reason Chuba Hubbard is still hanging around in some of your shallower leagues, even though they're heading into the bye, I would absolutely be looking to buy him, because especially he not only has Miles Sanders been hurt, he's just struggled in general, and Chuba Hubbard looks good. For wide receivers, the Bourne identity just keeps pulling these amnesia acts where he disappears for a while, then he comes back and kicks ass. Kendrick Bourne for the New England Patriots. So he's definitely not, like a consistent wide receiver, but honestly, he's the best wide receiver they have. The bones of Juju Smith-Schuster. I know there's that rookie. I can't even remember his name that people like, but it is Kendrick Bourne is ultimately the primary wide receiver. So by sheer necessity, Kendrick Bourne should probably be owned in more leagues. The one I'm really interested in, and I had already picked him up in a few leagues, Curtis Samuel, is the reason that Jahan Dotson is not breaking out, is because Curtis Samuel is still a good NFL player, has a relationship with Ron Rivera, and is still very heavily involved in that offense. And he's the secondary target behind Terry McLaurin, and he has the ability to take, a lot of running plays. So he's involved in both facets of the game in terms of running and passing. So I really like Curtis Samuel. He would definitely be a priority of mine in leagues where he's still available. And then I like Rashid Shaheed. If you're just looking for the upside deep shots, Wan'Dale Robinson and Josh Downs. Josh Downs I really like, but Wan'Dale in deeper leagues, I don't really want to own a Giants wide receiver, but twist my arm and force me right now. I think it's Wan'Dale. But it's gross in New York City on both fronts, whether it's the Giants or the Jets. Quickly through tight ends, because they're tight ends. Jonnu Smith should be owned in most leagues at this point, especially anything with any kind of tight end premium for receptions and first downs. Michael Mayer, I had mentioned him. He needs to be owned. If he's going to start doing things as a rookie tight end. Dawson Knox. So Dalton Kincaid is in concussion protocol, I think it is. And if he misses any time, or, if he's continues to struggle, it seems like Dawson Knox may end up just being the sole tight end. And if that happens and he starts to see more targets and more end zone targets, he could be worth a deep add. Again, these are kind of more fringe guys for sure. The Dawson Knox and Wan'Dales of the world. You got to be in a 14+ team league and hurting. For defense this week, I think Packers at Broncos is an interesting one. The Broncos have kind of started flailing a little bit on offense, and they haven't been putting up that many points, so I'm willing to take that shot. Vegas at the Bears with Justin Fields out, 100%. The Bears should be targeted. They have no running backs available. They're all hurt. Justin Fields is hurt now. What else besides DJ Moore do they even have on? It's DJ Moore and Cole Kmet with no quarterback. So I don't know what they are planning to do for offense. Maybe this Bagent guy can surprise us. I'm not really counting on it. I think the Bears are going to be very heavily targeted in terms of defensive streaming options. And so Vegas, widely available. And they've been a kind of good defense. Max Crosby leading the charge there. They haven't been great, but they've been sneaky, kind of under the radar good. And then Colts, Cleveland, as long as Voldemort's out and Cleveland just continues to be one of these low-scoring defensive teams. It's kind of more of a bit of a floor play, but I think it's just a good option that you can take. And then, hey, kickers are people too. Legatron for the Jets. The Jets are going to struggle to score touchdowns the rest of the season. And then Brett Maher for the Rams, because the Rams get within field goal distance, but they don't always close it out. And then Nick Folk for the Titans, same thing. And Tannehill could miss some time. His ankle's hurt again. We'll see if it ends up being Malik Willis or Will Levis, and whether or not that's a shot in the arm for the offense, or if that turns out to be even more abysmal than what we've already seen. But quite frankly, I honestly don't really see how it could get much worse. So that's it for the waivers. We will get into basically just some trade targets, and then we'll get the hell out of here. Basically, with these, this is very much, again, so you're staring down the barrel of 2 and 4. You really can't afford to be taking many more losses. And so schedules and bye weeks are definitely going to start to creep up at this point. There are some high-performing players that if they happen to be on your team and you're struggling with a bunch of injuries, you could potentially trade these players for multiple assets that could end up being better for your team in the short term and not hurt you in the long term. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. So we'll start with the quarterbacks. Kind of get into it this way. Tua Tagovailoa. So the Dolphins. I mean, the Dolphins in general, their offense is on absolute fire. If you could trade Tua for a combination of Jared Goff or Jordan Love and pieces, that's something I would do right now if I am a losing team. So I'm not suggesting that you're 6-0 and you just trade Tua for no reason. Again, I am suggesting that you're looking at 1 and 5, you're looking at 2 and 4, and for the next 4 weeks, Tua will have to face the Philadelphia Eagles, who through the air can definitely be had and will be, caught up in high-scoring games, but have a vicious front seven. And so you do face that risk of, God forbid, anything happens to him. And then you can't trade him. And then after that, it's New England, Kansas City, and then a bye week. So those are 3 pretty tough defenses, and then a bye week, and nobody beats the bye week. So again, if you can pivot Tua into someone like a Jared Goff or someone like a Jordan Love, or even Lamar Jackson, who has struggled, but has still been pretty consistently good for fantasy, and also acquire another usable piece. Those are trades I would be looking to make right now this week. So that's, again, trading away Tua. Another example would be Matt Stafford, who has to face Pittsburgh, Dallas, Green Bay, and then the bye week. And then same thing with Kirk Cousins. Without Justin Jefferson, he's going to be facing San Francisco, Green Bay, Atlanta, and New Orleans. That is a brutal schedule. So again, I would be looking to pivot guys like Tua, Stafford, Kirk Cousins into guys like Goff, Lamar, and Love. Even with the bye weeks, like Goff's playoff schedule coming off the bye, he's going to have the Chargers, Chicago, Green Bay, New Orleans. That's a little bit tough. But then right back to Chicago, Denver, Minnesota to finish out. That's juice. Lamar, he's going to have Detroit, Arizona, Seattle, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and the Chargers. And Love is going to have Denver, Minnesota, the Rams, Pittsburgh, and again, the Chargers. So really good schedules for those guys. And they haven't, lit the world on fire or anything, especially like Love is coming off a bad game on the bye week. Lamar has kind of struggled, and the whole offense hasn't really been what we were sold in the preseason. As good as Jared Goff is, he is just consistently undervalued and underappreciated by the fantasy community. He's a guy that I feel like you could trade for. So those are some of like the quarterbacks. And then getting into running backs, kind of staying along, again, the same idea and theme. We're looking at Travis Etienne, who has been terrific. And I was never on the Tank Bigsby truther train. I'm very much not neither am I a Jalen Warren or a Tyjae snap percentage Spears truther. I'm very much like I was always entrenched on the starters for those teams are the starters. But Travis Etienne coming up is going to have a road game against New Orleans, who have been terrific on defense. A road game against the Steelers, who have you can run on the Steelers, but right after that is the bye week again. And then you have San Francisco, and then you have Tennessee, who've been really tough against the run before you get to Houston. So there is a little reprieve at the end. But again, if you're looking at year 2 and 4, and potentially between New Orleans and that bye week and San Francisco and Tennessee, if you take 3 losses, now you are 7 losses. You're not making the playoff for the most part with 7 losses in most leagues anyways. So again, this is make or break time. Looking at that, and here's another one. Raheem Mostert is absolutely killing it. But again, the same issue that we saw with Tua at Philadelphia, New England, at Kansas City, bye week. If you eat a couple L's there, you're not going to be able to recover or even make the playoffs. And then, so it doesn't matter if you have Tua and Raheem Mostert on your team at that point, because if they struggle in any kind of way over these next 4 weeks and then are great the 4 weeks after that, well, guess what? It's not going to matter for you because you're not in the playoffs. Zach Moss. Now, this one's a little more obvious because obviously at some point you would expect Jonathan Taylor to take over, but also they're going to have Cleveland, New Orleans, at Carolina. That's better, but then at New England. So the matchups, again, going to waver. And Jonathan Taylor, you assume, is only going to get healthier and eventually usurp more work from Zach Moss. So I would definitely be looking to trade him while you can. And then you look at, on the other side, like, who am I trying to acquire? So King Henry, Derrick Henry. I've been a huge proponent of Derrick Henry all year. I was never on the train of, oh, this is the year he falls off, get rid of him, blah, blah, blah. I've been riding him in several leagues. Now, he's had one true bust game where he just disappeared on you, scored under 10 points. He's had one other game where he scored 10 points. And then he's been really good otherwise. Like, he's been basically regular Derrick Henry. The offense is built around him. He is the center of the offense. And from week 11 on, if you can just get there, at Jacksonville, Carolina, Indianapolis, at Miami, Houston, Seattle, at Houston. There basically isn't a better running backs playoff schedule. And for Derrick Henry, the Yeti, who only gets better usually as the season gets longer and colder, he's absolutely a trade target, especially in redraft leagues. Even if you're in like a win now window. So if you're in a dynasty league, let's flip it. You're in a dynasty league now and you're 6-0 and you have your first or second round pick even. I would start with the second. I would go throw my second if the Derrick Henry manager is losing, let's say they're 2-4 or 1-5, even better. I would go throw my second round at the Derrick Henry manager. And if they say no, then I'll come back with the first. A lot of times that kind of gets the job done, but I would 100% be looking to buy in on Derrick Henry for the rest of this season to kind of bolster my roster and really put me over the edge to kind of get my dynasty championship out of the way. So King Henry 100% should be targeted. And especially if Tannehill is going to miss time and they get any kind of boost from whether it's Willis or Levis. I mean, it also confirms that they're going to keep relying on the run, a.k.a. Derrick Henry and Tyjae Spears. And as much as Tyjae snap percentage Spears has gotten all kinds of love from the fantasy community, he hasn't actually done much with those opportunities. Again, he's been a good complementary back. It sounds like I'm denigrating Tyjae Spears and saying he's not a good football player. That's not at all what I'm saying. This idea, though, from the fantasy community that Tyjae Spears is in any way, shape, or form endangering Derrick Henry's job is hysterical to me. So it's really not a comment on Tyjae Spears, but rather a comment on just how good I think King Henry is. So as is my nature, I went on like a little tangent there. But the other big targets for me for running back to trade for are going to be Ken Walker and Isaiah Pacheco. Now, with Ken Walker, he's been excellent, so you would probably have to pay up for him. But it still feels like the buy window is open on him. So he is past the bye week. Charbonnet, he still kind of looms as a potential, vulture of touches. But the schedule just kind of lines up really nice coming out of the bye with Arizona at Baltimore, Washington at the Rams, and San Francisco. So I'd be looking to buy Ken Walker. And again, I think when you're trading someone like an ETN or a Mostert, the value is seen as equivalent right now. Another one that isn't even on my list that I would try and trade for Ken Walker would be Tony Pollard. I mean, on the surface, Tony Pollard has succeeded by sheer volume, but the offense of Mike McCarthy has actually been pretty terrible for the most part. And he's actually been rather inefficient because, again, they've gone to this inside zone scheme that doesn't really fit his talents. He's much better at outside zone. This was something I had lamented coming into the season, where I thought Tony Pollard could end up being a bust. Now, again, by sheer volume and the fact that he's been able to hold up physically in terms of health, he's not a bust whatsoever. But I would definitely be a little bit concerned. And if I could pivot into someone who I see as being very talented with a better path to success and a ceiling, like a Kenneth Walker, I might be willing to make that pivot. And again, it would be dependent on my team. Isaiah Pacheco is the other one. I think he's just performed really well. The Chiefs' passing game obviously isn't where it needs to be. And so they've been relying on the run, honestly. And it's been a lot through just kind of standard running with Pacheco, who's just kind of a strong in between the tackles runner. And he's been pretty consistent. But he also hasn't had any like huge breakout games. And so I feel like he is a decent buy because for some reason people seem to still be concerned about Jerick McKinnon and CEH somehow, taking away from what Pacheco does, but he's just such a different running back from what they do. I really feel like he kind of has his own place in the offense, and he's kind of establishing himself low key as the second guy behind Travis Kelce. Like, it's find Travis Kelce and pound the rock with Pacheco. So, I'd be, again, looking to pivot away from an ETN, a Mostert, a Zach Moss, and again, off script, a Tony Pollard, and trying to buy in on King Henry, Ken Walker, and Pacheco. We'll wrap up the wide receivers. I'm looking to trade away Garrett Wilson. He's still getting it done with volume, but the ceiling is just capped with Zach Wilson. That's what it is. Like, I appreciate that he's very talented, but there is no huge ceiling to me with Zach Wilson, unless, Aaron Rodgers is doing this like weird magic healing for his ACL, like he's going to come back before the season's done. I don't really believe that, but if that did by some crazy miracle happen, obviously Garrett Wilson would be perceived as being more valuable and potentially actually have the ceiling that we all thought he did when Rodgers was healthy before the season started. But with Zach Wilson, I don't really see it. Chris Olave, he's very talented, but he's battling injuries and the volume amongst the team. The fact that Derek Carr just checks down so much to Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas is still there, Rashid Shaheed is taking deep shots away, and just the lack of touchdowns in general from Derek Carr. Like, Derek Carr is not coming out and throwing 40 touchdowns anytime soon. So the fact that it's just sheer volume kind of scares me that he is going to ebb and flow a little bit more than we were expecting. And so again, I'm not trying to sell him. This is not sell low. This is the perception of Chris Olave. I feel like is you can still sell high on him, and same thing with Calvin Ridley. Even though it was just the one game and then ultimately the one touchdown, the perception of Calvin Ridley, I feel like, is still seen as being like he has a lot of potential, and he probably does. But the schedule is brutal for the Jags coming up at New Orleans, at Pittsburgh, bye week, San Francisco, Tennessee. That's pretty rough. So if I can pivot again, and the guys I'm looking to buy now, if you could somehow pair up, if you're able to, put together, now let's say you can take one of my trade for targets, pair them with Garrett Wilson, Olave, and Calvin Ridley into a superstar like a Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown. Tyreek Hill feels like as about ungettable as a fantasy player right now as there is. But like I said, if you could get like a Diggs or an AJ Brown or something like that, by taking like Chris Olave and Tyler Lockett, Zay Flowers, Romeo Doubs. Those are my three that I'm really looking at. With Zay Flowers, it's the schedule, same as Lamar. Detroit at Arizona, Seattle, Cleveland, Cincinnati, at Los Angeles Chargers. Those are all winnable games. Those aren't like stalwart. There's a good couple decent defenses, don't get me wrong, but they're not like stalwart going to shut you down, the whole game kind of defenses. And even the Cleveland Cincinnati games, those are division matchups, and they're going to be at home for the Ravens. Those a lot of times kind of turn a little bit higher scoring. So I would be very much trying to buy Lamar and Zay Flowers. Tyler Lockett, he's usually my trade away guy, but he is a trade for just based on consistency, even more so than DK Metcalf. It feels like he's kind of Geno's guy. So I really like Tyler Lockett, but I also would be willing, again, to package him dependent. So again, if you could trade Tyler Lockett and Chris Olave to the Diggs owner who's worried about what's going on with Josh Allen, I would maybe be willing to make that pivot and kind of, take a swing for the fences, and maybe you're able to turn your team around that way. And if it doesn't work, I mean, who cares? You were 2-4 to begin with. So it's like, you got to take your shots here, swing for the fences and see if you can't turn your season around. But if you're just kind of also looking to maybe get some PPR consistency, Romeo Doubs, I mentioned Love's schedule with Denver, Minnesota, the Rams, Pittsburgh, and the Chargers coming up. And then, like I said, Flowers and Lockett. And then just quickly rattle through some tight ends. I mean, Sam Laporta has been fantastic. I think right now he's actually the tight end 2 in fantasy, which is crazy. But at Baltimore, Vegas, and then the bye week, and then the Chargers, it feels like the Baltimore matchup, because he's a little bit banged up still and he's playing through injury, and the bye week, obviously, those feel like 2 L's in terms of for your lineup. And I don't know that you can afford that right now. So if you can trade Sam Laporta, and again, you have to get real value. So if you could pivot Laporta and Tyler Lockett into Mark Andrews and Kendrick Bourne, doesn't matter. Like, get some lower end wide receiver that at least like performs and has volume. That's something I'm looking to do. In terms of tight ends that you can actually try and acquire, Kyle Pitts, I mean,
I thought my jokes were bad.
I'm kidding. Don't do that. Don't actually buy Kyle Pitts. No, Dalton Schultz is the one that I would be looking to buy. He feels just very buyable. He's very cheap, I feel like. And, with CJ Stroud getting more comfortable. And right now they're going to be on the bye week too. So you could definitely get him. You won't be able to play him this week, but it feels like you get him even cheaper than usual. But he's been getting more involved, and the schedule at Carolina, Tampa Bay, at Cincinnati, Arizona, Jacksonville, Denver, and at New York Jets, like those are very kind of winnable games, games where they'll be competing. So I'm very interested in Dalton Schultz right now. And then Cole Kmet is the other one in the short term with Las Vegas, the Chargers. New Orleans is a bit tougher at New Orleans, and then Carolina, at Detroit, at Minnesota. The at Detroit, at Minnesota games, those ones, hopefully, Justin Fields would be back by then. But it feels like with the Bagent kid, with whatever quarterback that they're going to throw in there, they're definitely going to be looking short and for the tight end more often, it feels like. So I might throw in like a low offer for Cole Kmet, but really Mark Andrews hasn't like lit the world on fire, but I still see him finishing as the tight end 2 right behind Travis Kelce as being the most consistent. So I'm definitely putting in my higher offers. Evan Ingram at New Orleans, at Pittsburgh, bye week, San Francisco, Tennessee. We've talked about that Jacksonville schedule a couple of times. But Evan Ingram specifically has kind of been like a very mid-volume play. So those are some matchups that potentially scare me. Dallas Goedert had one amazing game. Otherwise has been very mid as usual. The schedule isn't terrible. It's Miami, at Washington, Dallas, and then a bye week. But he's the one I'd be looking to sell high. So if I have Dallas Goedert on my team, if I have Evan Ingram, I'm looking to pair them and, a wide receiver and see if I can't get myself Mark Andrews and, a lower end wide receiver back. That's it for me. We're going to keep it a little bit short this week. Monday Mayhem on a Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining as always. And we have the list of Joker. It has not been updated, unfortunately, but I can say I have been tracking some new accounts. I have a couple that I'm really excited about. I didn't want to rush and just kind of crash through the graphics. So it's going to be the same shout outs as last week for this week. But the list of Joker, I promise, will keep growing and it will get bigger next week. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe, super kick that bell, drop kick us a like. And as always, catch you on the flip side.
You just made the list! You just made the list!
Oh my God.
You just made the list! You just made the list! The stupid soccer mom's hair! You just made the list!
Now, she's reporting her neighbor, who's ex-Catholic by her demand, and Larry's supposed to talk to. Well, she doesn't know what to do. She says we shop her for Colleyville. Says she hates me ever since I arrived. Says I'm not allowed to go unheard. We got to a beach challenging in court. That I will not be an occupant of an assembly hall in her state. They're there to say that she's having fun. Not with yet this policy. That's Liver says she just moved in. And that she just, she don't want the challenge. Here we go. She plays with Pittsburgh Steelers. She wants no Bowling Green in Ohio. That's bad luck, but she wants someone else. Here we go. Here we go.